Fresh Brewed Politics. I am your host, Andrew. We're going to try a little different format today, though. What we're going to do is we're going to have producer Nick. He's going to do a little bit more talking during this because we were on our way back from Tennessee. I was at the Rogue Food Conference there. I did a speech there. You can check that speech out on our YouTube channel as well as our Facebook. I'm sure they're going to have a better audioed version that they're posting up soon as well. And you can go ahead and listen to it. It was, a pretty good speech, I think. But regardless of all that, we were on our way back and we were having a discussion about politics. And what we were actually discussing was sheriffs, how much power sheriffs have. And it was just blowing his mind as I was talking through how local government works with the sheriff and the coroner and how, technically speaking, there is a legal way that the Franklin County sheriff, if in that county, the governor of Kentucky was arresting people for going to church there and he wanted to take a stand, he could technically arrest the governor. And so we were having that discussion and we were checking out some things. It was just kind of like blowing his mind. It was a good discussion. He suggested, well, maybe we can have a little bit more of discussion type format for Fresh Brewed Politics where I can do my ranting and raving, but also we can have some discussion. So we're going to try that here today. So I thank you guys for joining us. Once again, please hit the share button for me there. It's down there in the corner. Hit the share button. Hit it. It's share. Hit the share button down there in the corner. If you're listening on YouTube, share us out there as well. And if you're listening to this on a replay on one of those platforms, just a reminder, this is available in podcast form on Apple and the Spotify and places like that. So you can check that out there. We're going to cover a couple of topics today. We're going to talk about, let's see, I'm going to start off with something that bothered me today. I was watching C-SPAN earlier and something happened that bothered me. I'm going to talk about that real quick. But we're going to talk about Joe Manchin. We're going to talk about Fauci. I had a thought, an epiphany, a conspiracy of sorts about Fauci that I wanted to share with you guys. Get me, put that bug in your ear. Maybe some of you have already thought about it. I don't know. But it crossed my mind the other day with the realization and revelations coming out about his 2012 paper that he wrote about gain of function research that I think is worth talking about. And we're also going to talk about the Open, the tennis player. So please hit that share button. If you want to support us, if you like what we're doing, we have a protest. If you're in Kentucky, Frankfort, Thursday morning, 9 a.m., we've got a protest there. They're having the HB1, SB1, and SB2 hearing. It's important. Go to it. We got to make a stand. People are like, oh, protests never work. No, maybe. I don't know. But at the time, they may or may not work. But what is important is those people who make a decision that you disagree with, they see that there is support in the other direction, and it encourages individuals to run, as well as it can push that Overton window, as well as it shows that there is support for their replacement. And I think that is really, really key. I don't know about you guys, but I think that's super key. So please, 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 please join us on Thursday at 9 a.m. Show your support for the state constitution. The Supreme Court is an elected body here in Kentucky, so we definitely can make a change there. But I'm going to talk about what bothered me today on C-SPAN. So I'm watching a hearing, a budgetary hearing on the, Secretary of State? Who's our Secretary, or Secretary of Defense? Which one is it? I'm checking real quick. Sorry. Okay. Secretary of Defense. Nope. I'm sorry, guys. I know
it was a Raytheon exactly.
Yeah, it was, and I'm terrible at it. Anyways, Secretary of Defense is sitting up there or department, whatever. It doesn't matter. They're up there talking. I'd recognize the name if I said it. And they're talking about the budget. And they're sitting over there talking about $100 million going to Burma. And they're talking about sending $100 million going to Burma and how that's twice as much as they sent last year. And he's discussing it. What's funny is if you ever watch these hearings on C-SPAN or anything like that, they're right now they're using Zoom. And when the guy comes in to ask a question and clearly cannot use Zoom. One of the reps, it's a representative, cannot use Zoom properly. They're getting weird echoes. You couldn't understand his questions. They're like, sir, can you rephrase, blah, blah, blah. He ends up using up all his time, his 5 minutes time, trying to get his Zoom to work. And what worries me is this man's deciding whether or not Burma gets 100 million of tax dollars, and he doesn't know how to work Zoom. And I'm like, why is... Like, surely there's better choices than these people out there. And there probably is. Like, learn to work Zoom, right? But also, too, you know, I'm sitting there, I'm like, you know, we talk about how we need to suddenly start. It wasn't the defense secretary. It was a representative from California, actually. If it's a representative from California, you couldn't work Zoom. And so... anyways, and they're talking about how they need to send more money to Mexico too. That was part of the discussion. I'm like, just full stop. Okay. The problem with, one problem we have is you think the government has to be the one that sends the money. Let me tell you, I've got a real simple formula here. Follow me here. Stay with me. Who is it that right now we're kind of in a little bit of an economic tiff with? China. That's right. It is China. Good job, guys. China, okay? China. So China, right? And what do we do in China? Well, what do we do over there? Well, we manufacture there. We enjoy the low cost of goods. So that's one of the reasons why we're having a hard time pulling out of China, right? However, you know, the cost of manufacturing, based upon a lot of studies in places like Mexico, Panama, South American countries, is really similar, if not the same as China. And wouldn't it be great if instead of trying to send tons of taxpayer dollars there, because we're trying to send money there because we're having all these illegal border crossings, and they say, well, that means we need to make their country better, which I kind of agree with you. Now, immigration, a lot of people would argue, is the worst way to make a country better, allowing people to immigrate to America. Especially because America's immigration policies, if we're legally taking in people, we're typically taking in the best, not the worst. And that best that country needs to continue to develop. If we're taking all their doctors and their tech people and everything else, then that country has nobody of high skill to help develop that country. There's an argument there, and I think it has a lot of merit. So if we instead encourage our American businesses to start doing their manufacturing to the south of us rather than to the, well, technically west, far east, or whatever you want to call it, of us, we would knock out two birds with one stone. We become less dependent upon China to do business with. Well, at the same time, we would be able to now not have to spend taxpayer dollars trying to economically develop South America. But, you know, what do I know? I'm just a guy with a microphone throwing out ideas. So anyways, that was just it annoyed me they couldn't figure out how to work Zoom while they're talking about how they're going to spend $100 million of our money. But, you know, hey, didn't say they had to be intelligent to get into office. You just got to win. All right. So kind of moving on with our day. Let's see here. Let's talk about this U.S. Open. You want to talk about U.S. Open? We got a complaint on sound. So. Oh, okay. We got a complaint on sound, so we are nixing Nick's mic. So, darn it, we'll pick that up Wednesday. It's not as if I designed all my topics around the idea that I'd be talking to Nick. I shall adapt. So, I was watching, last night I was watching Fox, and old house rep, what's his name? That has last night on Fox. He got the evening slot.
Trey Gowdy.
That's right. Old Trey Gowdy. And he was talking about, he was weighing in on this tennis player that opted out of one of the Grand Slams because she was fined for not attending the press conference after the Australian Open, and she didn't attend the press conference. Now, her stated reason for doing it, as she said, is because she was worried about her mental health, because they always sit there and put weird, they ask weird questions, and it messes with her health or something like that, mental health. And I understand that idea, but he was saying, hey, she should be allowed to not do that without getting fined, or that should be a choice. He brings up how politicians would sprint past the media when they didn't want to answer questions. She should be allowed to do that. And respectfully, Trey Gowdy, I say you are incorrect, and here is why. First off, as a rep, you have not agreed to the media to talk to them. However, when you play in these opens, you agreed to the media to talk to them. It's a part of your agreement with the league. Why does the league have this in place? Because the league makes money off of selling the rights to the matches and the rights to the press conferences. And that's how it makes its money. So if the league makes its money that way, and they're paying you out prizes for winning, they're providing the forum for you to get all your sponsorships. This is the highest paid female athlete in the world. Let's keep in mind. And if they're paying you to do these things and providing the forum for you to be able to make that money, you have to honor your contractual agreements for them providing you that opportunity. And your contractual agreement is that you will attend the press conferences because they make their money from selling that to the media. So respectfully, Trey Gowdy, I think you're wrong. She does need to either bow out of tennis, like she has this recent Grand Slam, and decide not to play if she can't handle the press conferences, because that's the agreement when she decides to play. If you want to play without press conferences, you can feel free to have private matches where you're not getting paid, where you don't have an audience, and where you're not getting sponsors to go do it. But until then, because you're making your money off the media, you better talk to them or else get out. That's what she decided to do. She decided to get out. I respect that choice of hers. But I don't think she had a right to still play tennis and ignore the media. Just my personal opinion. You can have an opinion too. You're probably wrong. I'm just joking. I'm not. Anyway, so moving on. Let's talk about Joe Manchin here. We're going to talk about Fauci's sketchiness on the back end of this in case Facebook flags it. You guys might have to switch over there to YouTube to catch it. Another note too, we're going to be doing these every day around 2-ish, okay? So from now on, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 2 o'clock, we're going to be doing this. It's on my calendar. I'm making it a priority. 2 o'clock, we're doing the podcast. And if I'm going to be gone somewhere, we'll pre-record it, and then we'll broadcast it. I don't know. But regardless, we're going to do it at 2 p.m. every day. I respect your time. I thank you guys for joining me, so you can put that on your calendars to check it out. Please hit the share button, and let's talk about Joe Manchin. So Joe Manchin came out saying he, A, doesn't plan on supporting the voting rights bill, meaning it's DOA, even if they use some sort of a process to try to get around the filibuster. For those of you who don't know what the filibuster is, real quick, I feel a need to explain it so you understand. So you have something called a moment of debate. So though a bill passes by 51 votes in the Senate, there's another vote that occurs before it passes, and that's the vote to end the discussion on the bill. So back in the day, you had something called a quote-unquote talking filibuster. And so what they would do is they would just sit there until the end of the day's business, and they would talk about anything random at all, as long as they were talking, to fill the time, because they were not voting to end the debate. And it takes 60 votes to end the debate on a bill before it can move forward. Well, a little while ago, they decided that this talking and this clogging up of the system made it to where they couldn't pass or do business on the other things that we could agree on. So they decided that you could do just say, I'm going to filibuster that. Basically, they call for a vote to end discussion. There's no vote. They say, okay, we're going to keep going on other items. We understand that you plan to filibuster this. You've indicated that. So we're just going to keep moving. Hold on, I'm going to take a drink here. That's right. 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm drinking a beer of sorts. I work for myself, so I can do that. Anyways, so Joe Manchin, right? So Joe Manchin comes in. Now, the Democrats, because they're getting upset about how much things are being filibustered because they don't A, want to have to compromise, and B, their policies at this point are so crazy. And that's part of it too. They're like, why won't the Republicans compromise with us? Well, they won't compromise with you because your policies and ideas are so crazy. They're so far outside of the norm that a compromise, to compromise with you on anything, is to compromise the entire thing that I stand for. I'll give you an example. I had this earlier. Let's say I believed, as I do, that the income tax is extremely immoral. I find it immoral because, well, to say I own a percentage of your time, to say I own a percentage of your income, is to say I own a percentage of your time. I own it. If I get 20% of every dollar you make, 30% of every dollar you make, and then you work time to make that, I am owning 20, 30% of your time. And to be owned, any of your time to be owned at all, where you're not compensated for it. Remember, it's not a private contractual agreement between you and an employer that you're getting compensated for. But for me to come in and say, no matter what, I own you. I own 20 to 30% of you and your labor, is to say you're owned by that entity. I don't think people should be owned by their state or by their nation. So I believe in zero income tax. So let's say the income tax is 30%. And I'm out here saying, I want 0% income tax. That's my bill. I put it forward. I say 0% income tax. And you say, well, let's compromise here. Maybe 15% income tax. Would you take that compromise? That's not a compromise. You're compromising. You're compromising down from 30%. I have to give every single thing I stand for up in order to make that compromise. I have to stand that I have to give up everything I stand for. And that's a problem. And that's the thing about compromising. But regardless, the Democrats are upset that that the Republicans aren't compromising enough with them, so they want to change the filibuster's rules. And it's very short-sighted. See, Joe Manchin, I think, is actually the smartest guy in the room. See, Joe Manchin lives in a very purple state. Make no bones about it. In fact, their current governor in West Virginia was elected as a Democrat, changed his registration going into his second term. I think after like a year in office, he changed his registration to Republican from Democrat. He got elected as a Democrat, changed his registration to a Republican, ran for re-election as a Republican, won, kept going as a Republican. West Virginia is a very purple state where the same governor can win as a Democrat and a Republican. Joe Manchin knows this. Now, am I saying Joe Manchin is setting himself up to switch parties possibly because he cares more about the Senate seat than he does party loyalty? That is very possible. And I think I would not be shocked if Senator from West Virginia, D, becomes Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia, R. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. But putting that to the side, let's say he does stay at D. He knows his district is purple. He knows if he rids the filibuster, he will lose in his next election. He knows if he votes for the voting change law, a law that will get struck down anyways by the Supreme Court, making the risk not even worth it to begin with. This is his calculations. He might also get voted out. However, there's a risk that I don't know how great it is to him that would actually be the best thing to happen to Republicans in West Virginia, and that is the Democrats replace him in a primary because he isn't far enough left, which would all but guarantee his seat would go to the Republicans. So Joe Manchin, is just trying to keep his seat. He's worried about a primary from the left, which is why I think he might go to Republican, because he's got a better chance maybe of winning a primary as a Republican. And like I said, if they primary him for being with a farther left person, I don't think West Virginia votes for him. So that seat goes over to Republicans. So actually, he's doing two things. Not only does he know if he allows the filibuster to pass and if he allows the voting rights to pass, he's losing his seat. But he also knows that if they get rid of the filibuster and if he loses his seat and it goes over to Republican and everything else remains the same, you will have just gotten rid of the filibuster at the same time that you are handing over. I'm sorry, and there's one other seat that gets lost, the other individual who would have to vote for it. I forget, it's a female, sorry. But you're handing over the power of the Senate to the Republicans with only a 51 majority. Because remember, it's 50-50 right now. And the tie vote is Kamala Harris.
Are you referring to Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski?
Lisa Murkowski, yeah. It's 50-50 now. So, Kamala Harris is the tying vote. They lose just Manchin's seat. It becomes 51-50 with Kamala Harris's vote. Well, Kamala Harris's vote is only needed if there's a tie. So it becomes 51-49, leading control the Republicans over that. Oh, thank you very much, Democrats. You just got rid of the filibuster for us. We don't even got to be the bad guy. Cinema. Somebody commented that. We don't even got to be the bad guy who got rid of filibuster during our time. We didn't vote to do it. You did. We just now are going to take advantage of that. We're going to pass all the things I can't see. Joe Manchin's much smarter, and the crazy far leftist Democrats, this is the thing that Democrats constantly keep doing. They don't think it's possible. They don't think it's possible that they lose an election. It doesn't cross their mind. They just think we're going to be constantly adding on seats. For an example, Bernie Sanders was on with Anderson Cooper, and Anderson Cooper asked him this very same thing. You get rid of the filibuster, the Republicans can just take advantage of that if they come over and take up seats in 2022. Bernie Sanders responded by being like, yeah, that can happen. That's just what he said. He's like, yeah, that's a thing that can happen. It doesn't cross their mind that they lose an election. And they're not planning for it. And it is truly something I think as a big mistake. Manchin, if anything, the rest of the Democrat Party should take Manchin's lead and understand, stop trying to put him on the hot seat about it like they are, and understand that the only thing standing between the Republicans having 51 votes with a gotten rid of filibuster is Joe Manchin. Understand that, and you should lay off of them if you're a Democrat. I'm a Republican. So you know what? Please, Joe Manchin, vote to get rid of the filibuster. Yes, we would get some pretty terrible things passed over the next year, but we can undo them very quickly in 22. Well, we couldn't undo them necessarily because the veto. We'd have to overcome the veto. But we would then now have set up nicely for 24 to have a Republican president and 51 seats in the Senate and, no filibuster. So, and we'd probably have the House at that point too. So, something for you to think about for sure. And if I was the Democrats, I would lay off Joe Manchin. But of course, they just want to get everything done. And of course, Joe Biden just wants to get anything he wants done because he wants his legacy. Because, if he makes it his 4 years, which is a terrible thing to say, I know, but it is the truth. If he makes it 4 years, he wants his legacy. He wants it. He wants people to remember him. But having Joe Biden trying to get forward crazy leftist policies now is like having somebody order for the table that won't be there for the meal or the bill. And quite frankly, I don't think that's who we should be relying on to set policies in our country. Now, guys, one more thing. Go ahead. Hit that share button if you're watching live on Facebook. Once again, hit that share button. if you are watching this on a replay and you see the video is going to end in the next minute or two, is because we're going into territory that Facebook could find they have a problem with. So if you're watching this on replay, go over to YouTube if you want to keep looking at my beautiful face while I go through it. It's Brewed. Just search BREWED, Andrew, and our channel will pop up. You can subscribe there. But also as well, once again, this is available in podcast form. So if you're watching this on replay back, just know Facebook may have flagged this part, so we may remove it. If you're watching live on Facebook, hit the share button. Let's do what we can before they flag us. And as always, guys, remember, go to brewedco.com, BREWEDCO.com. Buy our coffee. Put liberty in your cup. What are you drinking for in the morning? What's it say about you? All right, so going on to Fauci. Now, I am not a crazy conspiracy theorist, okay? Anybody who spends time around me knows I actually shun off a lot of the more conspiratorial stuff. The reason why is sometimes I think the general message, the more important parts get lost in the craziness that other people can look at. So if I'm just trying to get you to lower the amount of government in your life, I can achieve that more likely through not necessarily going into crazy individual beliefs or things like that, and instead just talking about crazy government overreach. Like, in some states it's illegal to collect rainwater, or in some states it's illegal to pump your own gas because people might die, right? And so anyways, but I've got a conspiracy I was struck with, one of the most possibly believable ones. Like if I found out this was true, I wouldn't be like, oh my gosh. I'd be like, I kind of could see this, okay? So follow me here. First, let's talk about who Fauci is. What have we seen him do? This is a good setup to this conspiracy I'm going to go into, okay? Now, let's just take Fauci at his word. I'm just going to take him at his word. I'm not going to argue that he changed his mind because of some other reason. I'm just going to take him at his word. Fauci has stated that the reason why he changed his mind on masks and telling people not to wear them was because he was in meetings with people that were worried about whether or not there'd be enough masks available for the hospitals. So he lied about this is him. He lied about the efficacy of masks in order to control our behavior, to ensure that we didn't wear masks, because he didn't want us to take it up. Now, one, if you are a masker and you truly believe masks are saving lives, why aren't you out protesting at Fauci's house? He's admitting that he let people die and lied to them because he made a logistical decision that turned out to not even be a thing. But anyways, we know that he believes at least that he can lie to control our behavior that may result in some deaths. This is his mindset. If it means it's better for the greater good. He's also stated that he keeps moving the goalposts of what would be herd immunity because he, personally him, he thinks he needs to keep hope. And if he is honest about where he thinks herd immunity happens, in his opinion, which it turns out his opinion ain't worth the toilet paper I use to clean my behind. But his opinion is that it happens at like 80, 90%. And so he's been lying about 60 and 70. And he admitted, this was on an interview, that he moves the goalpost so we don't lose hope. There's another person too, the director of the CDC. Now, I've referenced it many times that Thomas Massey has recorded calls where he's on the phone with the CDC director. And you can check this out. Politico has them. And the CDC director said because Massey at the time, it was very early on in vaccines, right? So you want to get them to the old people most at risk. And he said, it's weird. You're over here stating that everybody needs to get vaccinated, whether they've had COVID or not. But yet when I look at the data, when I look at what's coming in from the vaccine manufacturers, none of them in their cost-benefit analysis, I've read the data too, none of them in their cost-benefit analysis ever once say they found a discernible benefit to people who've had COVID and getting vaccinated. They just haven't found it yet. Even when the CDC talks about it now, they mention that there's been some preliminary data, but they've been advising you if you've had COVID to get vaccinated anyways for a while. Why is that? Well, on the call, they come out and they tell Massey why. They say, well, we're worried that people will think they've had COVID that haven't actually had COVID, and so they won't get vaccinated. So they were lying about what the data says in order to control your behavior because they believed it was for the greater good. This gets a little darker as we start taking a look at what happened in 2012. So in 2012, Dr. Fauci did a paper about gain-of-function research. Okay, now, I believe this was before he did a thing. Is this before he was funding gain-of-function research? Because remember, it's come out that America has been sending money to one company that then is sending money to the Wuhan lab in China, which is doing gain-of-function research. And remember, the NIH is not supposed to be doing gain-of-function research. But of course, there's a couple ways to fund it. I mean, we just did the old, I need $100 to pay my rent. Give me $100, Mom. And then I used my mom's $100 to pay my rent, and I bought a TV for $100. We just used that old switcheroo. So I don't know exactly when we started funding it. I'll look into that. We'll probably create a timeline for this. But in 2012, he wrote a paper. And this was what he said about gain-of-function research. In an unlikely but conceivable turn of events, what if that scientists become infected with the virus, which leads to an outbreak and ultimately triggers a pandemic? Many ask reasonable questions given the possibility of such a scenario, however remote. Should the initial experiments have been performed or published in the first place? And what were the processes involved in the decision? Scientists working in the field might say, as indeed I have said, that the benefits of such an experiment and the resulting knowledge outweigh the risk. It is more likely that a pandemic would occur in nature, and the need to stay ahead of such a threat is a primary reason for performing an experiment that might appear to be risky. Within the research community, many have expressed concern that important research progress could come to a halt just because of the fear that someone somewhere might attempt to replicate these experiments sloppily. This is a valid concern. This is Dr. Fauci stating that he believes gain-of-function research is worth the risk. Because it's better for the greater good. See, there's a reason why epidemiologists shouldn't be trusted to make policy. There's a reason why a lot of times in these crazy things, in these crazy movies, like we saw, if you watch The Kingsman, right? Climate scientists or pandemic scientists care more about the greater good than they do the individual. The ends always justify the means. His behavior about lying about masks in his mind, if we take his word, his behavior about lying about the goalpost, the CDC's behavior about lying about the efficacy of the vaccine in people who've already had COVID, his lying about gain-of-function research while he was funding it, knowingly funding it based upon what we're seeing from the emails, And his own words stating that it's better for the greater good to take the risk of an accidental lab leak because it'll help us save more people. Now, getting in the mind in that way, let me tell you my crazy conspiracy. Does anybody remember that in 2017, Dr. Fauci said Trump would face a pandemic in his presidency? Trump would face a pandemic in his presidency. He said that in 2017. Now, why did he say that? He said that because there was discussion about funding. His suppression about funding. He's worried about funding and people cutting out that money. And what that created was an interesting, once again, situation. Because he was worried about the funding, and Fauci cares more about the greater good than he does the individual. So here's my crazy conspiracy. Here's my crazy conspiracy. He's facing his funding being cut. He's facing the research being cut. He's facing people finding out about his gain of function research. He's facing a lot of issues there. But to him, this is a major problem. Doom and gloom Fauci, this is a major problem. Because if we don't spend money on pandemic research, there's going to be a pandemic that occurs naturally in nature that kills everyone. Kills everyone. And going, once again, crazy rabbit hole. I'm not even saying I believe this, okay? Let me make clear. But maybe I've watched too many James Bond movies. But based upon what I'm seeing about Fauci and his writings, he seems exactly like the type of person that would let a highly infectious manufactured disease, highly contagious disease, escape out of a lab to get more funding. So that way, a truly deadly disease, in his mind, doesn't end up coming out and killing half the world. Because when we look at COVID and you look at the lab leak, and so you go to the lab leak theory and you have to start asking yourself, was it purposely leaked or not? I mean, that's the real question now. And the argument would be, well, China didn't purposely leak it because twofold. One, why would you leak it onto your own people? And two, if you're going to use a bioweapon disease, you would use something a little bit more deadly than COVID. COVID is highly transmissible. But in the grand scheme of things, it actually doesn't have a very high death rate for disease. I mean, it just doesn't, right? I mean, what's it sitting at now? Like 2%?
Is it even 2%?
I mean, with people without comorbidities, it's super low. But it's low. Really low. So if I'm worried about getting my funding in, I would say, hey, you know what? What if a disease gets released? It's not super deadly. It's not going to kill like a whole lot of people. But it will save us from that greater disease down the road that I know is coming because I'm Fauci. And that I need the funding for. And then it goes into what I was just saying. Why would China release on his own people? Well, if you have a lab that you're working with doing gain of function research that's getting funded from America and the worldwide funding of diseases, they also have an investment in getting more funding because they believe they're doing important work. And so while I don't think China themselves would necessarily do it to their own country, they would send somebody or contained and then send them elsewhere. That's my opinion. I do think it's possible that a lab technician or two can orchestrate the release. Now you're saying, Andrew, that's crazy. That's crazy. Here's the reason why I don't believe most conspiracies. the scale and the amount of people involved needed to pull it off is so great. It's so huge. It's such a big conspiracy. You know, and don't jump down my throat, people. Don't hate me for what I'm about to say. I take the 9/11 conspiracy. I hear you guys about the steel and the stuff, and I've listened to you. But, you know, to make manufacturer plant charges, everything else in the government, I just think it would take a lot of people. It would take like 10, 15 people, 20 people. I think people would talk, right? I guess. I don't want to don't send me stuff about 9/11. I don't want them. But let's take aliens, okay? Is the government hiding aliens? I don't know. Probably not. It seems like the UFO report says that they're just like, for some reason, apathetic about the whole issue. But how many people would it take to work on something like that? It would take a fair amount. You know, you got the guy that's got to like come by and mop the floor. You know, I mean, those floors aren't clean themselves. So, you know, you've got a lot of people that had to be involved. So it's a lot of conspiracies. That's my biggest issue. It's like, too many people involved, and there's too many people involved there. And that too many people involved means that would happen. However, my crazy, crazy conspiracy doesn't involve that much compliance amongst the government. It really just involves a couple of people. I know I don't want to go into the 9/11 conspiracy, okay? Not today. We'll have a discussion on it some other time. But this conspiracy doesn't involve a lot of people. It involves one or two, maybe three people that are in on it. Now, am I saying Fauci was definitely in on it? I don't know. But what I am saying is you could at least look into his behavior and say that's the mindset of epidemiologists. And that is exactly the kind of mindset that releases a fairly non-deadly but highly infectious disease in order to ensure that there's enough funding that goes into infectious diseases so we don't lose the planet to a naturally occurring disease. It just seems like the kind of thinking. But it would really only take one virologist at the Wuhan lab to purposely infect those 4 people for this conspiracy to be true, that somebody wanted to release the virus because they wanted to ensure that pandemic funding continued and disease research continued because Trump was threatening to cut it. And everybody was upset. It also, the idea that this being manufactured lab leak goes to show that with Trump trying to cut funding CDC and the NIH and things like that, because he wasn't like, oh no, diseases. Turns out he was maybe right. Because it was the funding of those entities that created COVID to begin with. And he was right. The disease did not naturally occur in nature. I mean, this wasn't a naturally occurring pandemic. You see, for epidemiologists, it's always doom and gloom. So it is possible, I think. Crazy conspiracy. I'm not saying I believe it. I got to see more evidence. But I think it is possible as a purposeful leak done by epidemiologists because they're worried about getting in enough funding for the naturally occurring major pandemic that may occur. So there's my crazy tinfoil hat for you guys. Like I said, it's crazy. But I thank you guys for joining me. And you're still talking about 9/11. Listen, I know he sold the towers beforehand. I hear you. I know he also pulled out insurance. They leased them. He leased them.
He bought an insurance policy on them.
He bought an insurance policy on them, like how soon before?
A couple of months.
That doesn't seem as crazy when you figure the fact it's not the first time the World Trade Center was a target of a terrorist attack, though.
Right.
I mean, it had a bombing in the 90s. So, yeah, I want to know why he didn't have the policy earlier. I'm like, that's just bad decision making. That's just bad decision. That's just terrible decision making. But anyways, back to COVID. Sorry. And so we know it was manufactured. We know it was created in a lab. You see, don't talk to me about conspiracies because I'll start going into it super analytically. Being like, well, I'll be that rain on your parade. Like,
Talk about why jet fuel doesn't melt steel beams.
There is one conspiracy, though, I cannot discuss. That is flat earthers. They know they're crazy way more than I do. I don't even know how to argue with them on it.
Their whole idea is to drive you crazy.
I think so. I literally, like, flat earthers will be like, no, let me show you the curvature, blah, blah, blah. But I do love it when they show, like, a map. And they're like, nobody flies near the Antarctica, see? And I'm like, what airport's in Antarctica? Who would be flying to Antarctica? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Anyway, sorry. I apologize for getting off track. Point is let's have a special conspiracy theory session. I don't know what conspiracies we talk about. Send in your suggestions about conspiracy theories. We can maybe call in somebody who's crazy into a certain conspiracy.
We'll do like a Sunday special on conspiracies.
Yeah, there we go. Somebody that like really knows their conspiracy well. Send us a message. We'll have you on the podcast and we will discuss your conspiracy theory. But do not get mad at me when I rain on your parade, okay? Let's not do it, and we will be Googling like crazy all during it too, okay? Because it's not fair for you to expect me to come into an armed conspiracy discussion, a conspiracy theory discussion, as educated on the conspiracy as you are, because it's your conspiracy. So you got to make sure I have the ability to look up, okay? So send me a message if you want to be on the show. Anyways, guys, I thank you guys for joining us. Check out brewedco.com, brewedco.com. Buy our coffee. It funds our work. It funds our court cases, our protests, everything else. Like I said, we have a protest going on Thursday, 9 a.m. at the Capitol for the Supreme Court hearing on SB1, SB2, and HB1. I want you guys to join me out there, and let's keep fighting the good fight, and you can help us just by simply drinking a cup of brewed every morning. Thank you guys for joining us.